When I say Crusades, what do you picture? A heroic noble knight holding a cross fighting off the invading Muslims? Overzealous Europeans killing non-Christian civilians? Or normal soldiers fighting on a pilgrimage to a holy site? Big difference in these interpretations. This is the complex legacy of the Crusades. These wars and how we interpret their legacy is influenced heavily by our political and religious views. So for this video, I'm going to try my hardest to keep an unbiased view of these events. For those who don't know anything about the Crusades, they were a series of wars/pilgrimages declared by the Catholic Church, which occurred across Europe and Asia starting in 1095. For the next few centuries, battles between Christians and Muslims would be fought over the Holy Land, Anatolia, and Spain. Knights, nobles, and peasants from across the continent took up arms and traveled out east in response to the expansion of Islam. So much changed, it spurs the question, what if the Crusades never happened? How would this alternate world look if the Crusades never existed? Well, before I explore this scenario, we need to explore the history of the Crusades. If you want to skip straight to the scenario, click on the knight. I'm not going to go into specific detail for the entire history of the Crusades, simply because there is so much that took place. If it looks like I'm overgeneralizing, it's because I have to. If you want to learn more about individual Crusade leaders or battles, click on the links in the description. In 11th century Europe, after the fall of the Roman Empire, it truly was a dark age for the continent. Nobles used their soldiers to pillage and wage war against one another. Violence was prevalent. The Byzantine Empire was losing its once vast territory to the invading Turks. In 1095, a new dominant power called the Seljuk Turks invaded Asia Minor, conquering previously Byzantine Christian lands. The Turks blocked Christians from taking pilgrimages. In response, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius asked for help from Pope Urban II. Pope Urban aimed to mend relations with the Orthodox and help his fellow Christians. Instead of providing the small force Alexius wished for, he decided to use the opportunity to unite all of Europe. Urban II called for essentially a war/pilgrimage against the invading Turk armies. Those who aided the Eastern Christians would receive penance for their sins, as long as they bore the cross. Catholics from across Europe formed an army of 100,000, an unprecedented amount for Dark Age Europe, and marched to the east. Overgeneralizing lots of events, for the next 3 years, crusading forces would fight their way through Asia Minor and present-day Syria, retaking former Byzantine cities from Muslims like Antioch and Edessa. The crusading forces took Jerusalem, defeated the Muslims, and then slaughtered many Muslims and Jews inside the city. The First Crusade was a success for Europe, and in the aftermath, against all odds, 4 Christian kingdoms were established in the Middle East. Eventually, one of these kingdoms, Edessa, would fall back to the Muslims, spurring another crusade, the Second Crusade, to reclaim it. This crusade ended in failure and isn't that important. Islamic general Saladin captured Damascus and then Jerusalem in 1187, spurring the Europeans to declare a Third Crusade. The war ended in military failure, with Richard the Lionheart making peace with Saladin. The Muslims could keep control of Jerusalem as long as pilgrims could migrate freely. Because Richard failed to reclaim Jerusalem, Pope Innocent III soon declared the now infamous Fourth Crusade, this time targeting Egypt, the new heart of power in the Muslim world. A sizable force of 20,000 arrived at Venice, who built the ships for the Crusaders to sail to Egypt. They would never get there. The Crusaders were left in debt from the Venetian ships. Unable to pay, Venice offered the Crusaders a chance to be free by doing the city's bidding. So the Crusaders sailed off to Venice's rebellious city of Zara, sacking the Christian city. Pope Innocent III did not like this killing of fellow Christians thing and excommunicated the entire crusading army. Now rogue, a Byzantine prince offered to pay the debts of the Crusaders if they traveled with him to Constantinople to depose the current emperor. The Crusaders agreed and deposed the leadership. However, the new ruler was soon overthrown by an emperor who didn't wish to pay the debts of the soldiers. This didn't go too well, and so the Crusaders seized and sacked the largest city in the Christian world. In Constantinople, soldiers raped, looted, burned churches, destroyed libraries, monuments, and killed countless civilians. What the barbarians did to Rome, the Crusaders did worse to the Byzantines. Constantinople never recovered. The city was practically killed by the Fourth Crusade and was never able to rebuild. It was conquered by the Turks in 1453. After this, the Crusades took a fundamentally different turn. It wasn't just between Christians and Muslims, it was now between any enemies of the Church. Focus shifted to Northern Europe, where knights fought countless crusades to convert the pagans in the Baltics. They became smaller, focused on both Muslims but also European heretics within Catholic Europe. Campaigns against Muslim Spain were successful, unifying all of Spain in Christian rule by 1492. Escapades were sent back into the Holy Land during the 5th through 9th Crusades. However, they did very little to stop the growing power of the Muslims. The Ottoman Empire soon took over the Byzantines and most of southern Europe. So what if the Crusades never happened? What would be the effects if such a significant event in medieval history never occurred? Keep in mind, this is almost 200 years of history completely changed. Here is one scenario. One of the most profound effects of the Crusades was not just how it split the Islamic and Christian worlds, but how it split the Western and Eastern European world. Before the First Crusade, East Orthodoxy had only been around for a few decades. Relations were sour between the Latin Church and the Byzantines, but not terrible. Pope Urban II was hopeful the Greeks would return to Catholicism, which was one of the reasons why he called for a crusade in the first place. However, in the next few centuries, the frequent interactions between Crusaders and Byzantines would sour relations between Catholics and Orthodox. In this alternate timeline, without the Crusades, there was a possibility that East and West churches could have reunified back under the Catholic Church. I'm not saying it certainly would have happened, but without the Crusades, reunification could have been easier. If the church somehow did unify, this would change Europe's entire history. The Great Schism between East and West not only split the continent in religious practice, but divided the culture of the continent as well. In this alternate timeline, there would be less of a cultural division between Eastern and Western Europe. The Europeans still could have helped out the Eastern Christians without declaring a holy war, perhaps by eventually fighting against the Turks in Anatolia and not in the Holy Land. By doing so, the Ottoman Turks could have been held off in this alternate timeline and not expanded into Europe. In this alternate timeline, Jewish and Christian relations would be much better during the medieval times. In our timeline, countless innocent Jews were killed in Germany and France during the First Crusade, as well as persecuted by zealous anti-Semitic laws. The ethnic violence appalled many intellectuals and church leaders who didn't expect the violence. The church condemned violence against Jews, but that didn't stop violent knights from carrying out atrocities. With no call of crusade, there wouldn't have been these massacres. In this alternate timeline, medieval Europe would have been much more violent. Nobles would be directly fighting each other instead of uniting against a common enemy. Without fighting to defend Christianity, the idea of Christendom wouldn't be as prevalent in this alternate timeline. The Renaissance might not have existed as we know it. The Crusades expanded Europe's view of the outside world. Without escapades into the East, Europe doesn't rediscover knowledge from the more cultural Arabs and Byzantines. Interaction with these societies were a crucial boost into taking Europe out of the Dark Ages. Without trade from the crusading kingdoms, Venice might not have become a major trade power, so it wouldn't have had enough money to then fund the arts. Without the Crusades, the Spanish and Portuguese would still fight against the Muslims. However, without the zeal of the Crusades, the fighting would take much longer than in our timeline. I can't predict if Islam would spread further into Europe, however I doubt it would. Europeans fought off Muslim invaders successfully in France centuries before the Crusades, even while the continent was in turmoil. Wars of defense would still occur against the invading Moors in Spain, or if the Turks invaded Europe. In all, without the Crusades, the culture of Europe, both religiously and secularly, would have been changed in ways too difficult to accurately predict. It was a movement which revitalized faith and the church in Europeans' lives. It certainly militarized medieval Christianity, but in part it helped stabilize the warring nobles and take the violence elsewhere. The Crusades strained relations between the Orthodox Christians and Islamic world, a strain which truly never recovered. It's hard to say just how much the world would be changed if the Crusades never happened. What do you think would have been? Say in the comments. Like on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.